here, st, and the pseudonym is pulled off because it's no longer needed. Between the proxy server and the client, there may be some problems of, phishing or eavesdropping. But between the client and the original server, that's the thing on the far right, there doesn't need to be a pseudonym. In fact, there shouldn't be because there wasn't before. The beauty of this technique is going to be that you can use an existing server, plug this in between the server and all of your clients, and all of a sudden they're all secure. Now the page goes back through the translating proxy, puts the pseudonyms on, translates it, does many things, and then the result is sent back to the client. So now all the links they click will have random numbers in them. Now, ideally, it wouldn't be two separate servers. It would be two pieces of software on the same server. It's cheaper. It's probably faster. But we implemented it this way so that you don't have to completely rewrite any websites. You just plug it in and it works. It's easy, and that means it's expandable. So what is a pseudonym? I talked about these randomly generated things, but where do they come from? Well, they're established. As soon as somebody comes to my website, I look to see if they have a pseudonym. If they don't, I give them one, make a new one up, add it to all the links on the web page. Any further links will have a pseudonym. I then probably want to pollute. If they already have a pseudonym, I check to see where they came from. I can use the HTTP referrer header and find out which page brought them to my website. If it's one of my own web pages, I'll just use the pseudonym they came with. If it's not one of my own web pages, that may be a phisher trying to infuse a pseudonym into my system. So I'll throw it away and make a new one. When in doubt, throw it away and make a new one. Doesn't take very long. So that HTTP referrer field is sometimes not there. So you could implement a strategy with cookies to determine whether or not it's valid. You could use message authentication codes. There are a lot of different ways to basically decide whether or not the pseudonym in use is valid. So I won't go into that. If you're interested, I can point you to my paper. But there are other things to deal with. Robots come to the website. Search indexers. Google's bot that comes and pulls all the web pages off so that people can search for them. I don't want to have to privatize those. I don't want to have to hide their URLs because they're not going to be vulnerable to phishing attacks. Who do you think Google banks with? And does their bot do online banking? Probably not. So there's no need to do that. We can detect who their user agent is, figure out if it's a bot or not, and if we know for sure it's a bot, turn our system off. No overhead. Additionally, when do we pollute? I told you we should probably enter random websites into the person's history and cache if they don't have a pseudonym with the URL they're using. Well, yes, you should. But you should also consider where they came from. And this is totally up to people who implement the system and how much they trust all the websites around them. In short, you want to pollute as little as possible because this takes a while on the user's browser. It's messy, and it generates unwanted traffic. What about links to offsite data? Well, if there are links on my web page to other web pages, they can sniff the referrer field and figure out where the person came from. If they do that, they get a pseudonym. They can use that to try and phish. So we don't want that pseudonym going to other people's websites. We want to get that out of the HTTP referrer field. We can generate a redirector on our website that will do this for us. Strip off the pseudonym and redirect it. Additionally, bookmarks. People want to bookmark web pages. If they bookmark a page with a pseudonym on it, they'll always be using the same pseudonym. Then it's like not using a pseudonym at all. So we have to be careful about this. You have to use a technique, either HTTP referrer or a cookie that expires quickly, to throw away these pseudonyms as soon as they're used. Additionally, you need to encourage people not to bookmark sites with pseudonyms. Anyway, let me go into an example of how this works. So here's a client. Bank.com is the translating proxy that I just talked about. It does all this work. And 10.0.0.1 is the hidden server, the formerly known as bank.com server. We've pushed that into a private network behind bank.com so that it can only be accessed by our proxy. This is important. People have to be forced to go through the proxy, which to them will look like the server. So what happens is the person sends a request. We'll assume that a pseudonym is already established. And bank.com strips off the pseudonym and forwards the request on to the real server. The real server then just serves up what it normally would and sends it back to bank.com. Then all the processing starts. Say we start with these three things. We have an off-site link, we have an on-site link, and we have a relative link. First of all, the on-site link originally pointed to the real server. We now have to point to the translator instead, because the translator is now pretending to be the real server. So that's replaced. Then we have to set up a redirect so that g.com doesn't know the pseudonym that was used. Finally, we have to throw in this pseudonym that we've generated, or the one that's currently in use. And notice that the relative link stays a relative link. Browsers are smart enough to figure out where the page came from and do relative links inside that domain. Once that's done, it's sent back to the client. The important part here is this is the client's perception. There's no change. This can be implemented by a service provider to protect all of their clients. That way, you don't have to convince a whole bunch of people to install an extension. You don't have to tell them to go into preferences and check a certain box. You don't have to rely on standards committees to turn something off in their software specifications. It just works. Nothing will be different from the client. I believe this is the most important thing, because I don't think we can rely on people who are browsing the web to know exactly what they're doing, or even care. But if I'm a bank and I don't want my clients to be phished, this is the easiest way to fix them. It's like a guardian angel. Okay, so there are some different policies you can define when using this proxy. Which sites do you want to hide the pseudonym from if they're going from your site off-site? That's an off-site redirection policy. Depends on how much you trust people around you. Or you're the author of your own website. Maybe you don't even have any off-site links. You don't need a policy then. There's a data replacement policy. This means what type of data do you go through and translate. I showed you HTML. There's also URLs inside CSS, JavaScript, Flash files, Java applets, you name it. So maybe different types of data need to be modified. And additionally, who are you going to specify as a robot versus a real person? When do you actually need to do this privacy? And of course, there are more special cases that I'm not going to delve deep into. But if you have distributed serving like Akamai, they serve from a whole bunch of computers the same content. And there's something to take into consideration there, because maybe you need more than one proxy then. Additionally, what if I trust a site and I don't want to have to throw away a pseudonym every time somebody comes from their site to mine and generate a new one? You can make these transferred pseudonyms. Pseudonyms from one site to another that you can trust. Again, I don't want to go into depth with that. And the cache pollution reciprocity basically means that a whole bunch of websites get together and collude so that they define a set of sites that will be entered into a person's history. And I told you about the pollution and about how unwanted traffic may be not well received. But if all of these websites, say all the banks that you know about, if all of the banks decide that they want to use all of the banks' websites as pollution, then nobody will get mad about the traffic. They're all pretty much sharing the same type of pollution policy. So there's still the unsolicited traffic, but this time at least there probably won't be any legal implications. Okay, so we implemented this. We wrote a crude Java applet just kind of to see if it would work. It simulated a web server and acted as a translating proxy. We made the pseudonyms as 64-bit numbers. You could make them longer. Overhead is not much more to make them longer. I used Java's secure random because it's not the fastest thing in the world, but it works pretty well. And I wrote an experimental client to test how long it took to load the pages. I wanted to know how much overhead there would be in using this in front of a web server.